My guest today is Stacy Golden-Lisnock, founder of Got It Together Now. Stacy spent 30 years in the financial services industry as a certified financial planner, where she saw how unprepared her clients were when a health issue or death occurred. This need prompted Stacy to develop an online course, Got It Together, which guides the conscientious to get their important documents and personal information up to date, organized, and in one place. There is never a better time than now to get this taken care of. Now, I know our audience is wondering how this applies to them, since this show is primarily about preparing for college. But I promise we'll get to that. I have personally been on both sides of this issue. When I was a college student, my mom passed away. My dad passed just a few years ago, and when my own kids were in college, I saw what happens when you don't have your legal and health and financial ducks in a row when it comes to your adult children. So stay with us. I'm certain you'll learn a lot in today's segment. You just might want to take notes. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Denise. So happy to be here with you.
I'm so glad you could join us because this is such a really important topic. You had a long career as a financial advisor. So was there a particular reason why it is that you're now focused on getting people organized instead of financial planning?
In 2018, I did get this very bad case of the shingles. And for most people, they're like, oh yeah, I had shingles. It was no big deal. But for me, I waited way too long. It was all about the timing. And so I ended up with this horrific case and they didn't even know what I had. They put me in isolation. Anyway, it went on for at least a good 6 months and I was out of commission. And at some point during that time, I actually asked my husband, am I going to die? Because I just didn't feel like I was going to get better. He's like, no, you're not going to die. And I'm like, you're lying to me. It's like, I was sure this was the end. And then in that moment, I'm like, and if this is the end, I don't have my stuff together, which is pretty bad. So I thought, you know what, if I get better, I am going to get my stuff together and I'm going to help other people to do it too. Because in my career as a financial advisor, I would always tell people, look, you don't have a will, you don't have a trust, this is going to cause a huge problem if you should pass away. And some of my clients are in their 70s and 80s and they're still not concerned about that. You'd think they'd have enough friends and family that have gone through it before them, but apparently not. So I thought, well, what can I do to do a broader brush and get the people that actually are interested in doing this to come along with me and get this stuff done?
That makes sense. It really does. Now, I understand that you went through this. So what I'm hearing is that it's really important to hear this message and take action, because if you don't, there are consequences. So what can be the potential consequences of not taking action and not getting basically all your legal paperwork together?
Right. Well, in my course, I call it unintended consequences. It's like really the person that didn't do the preparation has no idea what carnage they left in their wake because they're not here to see. But generally, and I'm sure anybody listening to this knows at least one family this has happened to where they don't talk to each other any longer. There's this whole infighting that happens, and it's because things weren't laid out. I mean, can you imagine, like, say one kid's left out of the will intentionally, but that kid doesn't know until the reading of the will, and then he hates all the other siblings because they were not written out of the will, things like that. So sometimes parents inadvertently pitch their children against each other, and that's a huge thing. And that's really one of my reasons. I personally know a few families that this has happened to, and it's crazy because these were families that were the closest families, growing up, and they're the very families that are hating on each other, like because of something that happened. And people do get very greedy, I guess is the best word, around money. I mean, you don't even have to be gone yet, and your kids could be all arguing about who gets what. That's right. Pretty bad. So if you take care of it and you have it all laid out and you have all your wishes known and you have the discussions, that's the most important thing, then those things are not as likely to happen. There's absolutely no guarantee with people though, but at least you're a step up above having done nothing.
Right. It's not a surprise. And I can agree with you. I've seen it myself. In our family, my personal family, we were pretty lucky. We had really good relationships with one another, with our family members, with our siblings. And when my dad passed,
Yeah.
his will was laid out quite simply. This person gets this very special item, and here's why. And, everything else is literally split equally. And even when it comes to, because you may not think that you have anything to give. It's like, okay, well, we really don't have a lot of money. Great. Trust me, my dad would have felt the same way. But my dad owned a home. When that home gets sold, what happens to that money? He had insurance. He had life insurance policies. There's going to be some amount that's going to get divvied up by the way that you have indicated, okay? And all these things need to take place. But it's more than just what happens when you die, because that's the biggest problem I find, is that we all feel like this is way off. This is far away. It's 20, 30, 40 years away from here. But what I've found in my line of work, where I'm talking with parents that have young adult children, they also have the same needs. And it's not just the parents, but the children as well. What we tend to forget is that no one's guaranteed tomorrow. Let's start with that. So just because, oh, well, that'll come, later, that later might be tomorrow. You just don't know. And none of us wants to talk or think about the end. But the truth is, it's going to come for everyone at some point in time. I have actually seen families whose young adult children went off to college, got into an accident, ended up in the hospital, and passed. But that young adult child had ownership of some things, some financial things. Without a will, how do you handle that? Well, it gets handled by the courts, and it can take years. In addition, there's also the health issues. If you have a young adult child, someone 18 and older, you as the parent don't legally have any rights to their information. If they're in the hospital and, dealing with an illness of some kind or an accident, as their parent, without a power of attorney, without a medical power of attorney, you don't have any right to talk to the doctors to find out anything about your child's condition. And these are the types of things that what you're doing to try to get this paperwork together now before it's needed and before you end up with, well, basically a lot of heartache.
That's right. Yeah. So there are statistics on that as far as like the 18 to 24-year-old, like how many of those actually pass away every year. And they're generally due to accident for the most part. How many are a non-fatal situations? It's something like 250,000 a year.
Wow.
So that is troubling when you send your child off to college, especially if they're in another state or far away and you don't have any real access. You might not even find out that they're in the hospital or that they're unconscious or something like that, because how would anybody know to get a hold of you? So one of the things that I've recommended is that people do this healthcare directive, advanced directive, and that gives not only your wishes, your final wishes, and how you want, if you want to be resuscitated or what you want, but it also lets you name an agent, and so that somebody can speak on your behalf. Because if you're not able to speak on your behalf, then what happens is the doctors, because they don't want to be sued, they will do all kinds of these heroic measures to keep you alive. And if somebody was there to actually make a decision, might not have chosen that path because of the outcome opportunities being so slim in some cases that they would have said something different. The fact that as a parent, and I have, grown children too, they're past all this, but I didn't have any of this in place, and thank God I didn't need it. And I think for the most part, it just is never brought to your attention. I never had anybody bring it to my attention and say, you really should have, now that you have 18-year-olds, you should have these documents in place. They should have them in place. They can choose not to do it. They could choose not to choose you, which would be hurtful, I would think, to any parent. But it even goes beyond the medical stuff. When they're at school, you can't find out any of their grades or any of that. They're just adults, and you don't have access to anything unless they give permission. So that's the big thing. The other thing is when your child's out of state, there may be forms that are different in another state than in your state where you live.
Wow.
So what I've been advising is that you have two sets of forms, one for your state and one for the state where they're at school. There's so many things to consider, but really you need to be aware. I think that's the number one thing, right? Be aware that this is existing, and that once your child is 18, that you no longer have all of that control that you once had. And when it came to I can't remember, I was calling the doctor about something, one of my kids, and they were 18, still in high school, right? And they're not going to give me the information, and I'm sitting there on the phone arguing with them. And I mean, it's the law. They could get in a lot of trouble if they do disclose this information. And so it's not like they're doing it, to make you mad or whatever. They're just trying to follow the law, and that's the law. So
You're right.
there you go.
And they literally can't tell you anything. Even if, you as a parent can make an appointment for your adult child. But if you call back to ask what time that appointment is for, they can't give you that information. It's absolutely crazy, but it is the law, and there's a lot of good reasons for it, and I understand. I still remember when my daughter was in college, in her first years, when I found out about this, I called the health facility on campus to ask about a particular medication that my daughter had with her. It's a life-saving medication. And asked if there would be, someone there that, understood this and, et cetera. Can't tell me a thing. She's got to come in and sign this paper before we can talk to you. It's like, oh my God. So I had to make sure that she, got off her butt and took care of that, because these are important things that need to happen.
Yes.
And preferably do it before classes begin, because at that point, all bets are off. Your kids are going to be really busy and will not have time to go across campus and take care of paperwork that will only take them seconds to sign, but may take, as much as 30 minutes or even an hour if they have to, go across campus and wait for people or what have you and be in line. So try to handle what's necessary for your student in your state and in the state that they are going to school in. I didn't even think about the fact that there might be something additional or different in a different state. But there's going to be more than just one thing. There's going to be health. There's going to be handling their finances should something occur. There's going to be, finding out or being able to get a copy of their transcript if necessary, if you're helping them with something with that for them. There's just a lot of different things to know.
Exactly. So the three critical documents would be the HIPAA authorization. So that's the first one, the HIPAA authorization form. We all know about HIPAA because every time you go to the doctor, you have to sign the HIPAA thing. But basically, that doesn't allow them to give any information unless that's signed. The healthcare power of attorney, the healthcare advanced directive, to make the medical decisions. The advanced directive gives also like what your wishes are, if you should be dying, what is it you want. And then the other one's a general durable power of attorney, and that's the one you were talking about for the finances, to be able to do things with their banking and with their bills and do things like that. The other thing that comes up is if you have a bank account, you probably as a student don't have your parents listed on there. I mean, my son has one with me still to this day, and it just is handy if we have to switch money back and forth, but that's not his main account, right? That's just like kind of a little side account. If you only have your name on the account and you're to pass away, there's a problem there. And a lot of bankers are really strict, and some of them are a little bit better. I think it just depends what your relationship is with them. But if you do this thing called transfer on death on your accounts, and everybody should have this, if you've got any accounts that only you own individually, there's no other joint owners or anything on it, you go to the bank and you ask them as a transfer on death, sometimes a POD or a TOD. It's like a beneficiary on your checking or savings account, and it's great. And it's different at every bank. So one bank wanted just like his name and his phone number and the relationship, where another bank wanted his social security number, his date of birth, they wanted all kinds of stuff. And I think, I can't remember now, but I kind of think one of them made me bring him in. I can't really remember. But my sister had me be on her accounts, but she actually put me on as a joint owner. That isn't that smart to do with your kids. if you wanted to name your kids as the beneficiary on your accounts,
Mhm.
you don't want to necessarily do that, because if they become, if they get sued, if they get getting divorced or whatever, they have a trouble with the IRS, if their name is on your accounts as a joint owner, it can get seized as if it was 100% theirs. Because sometimes, we're talking right now about the kids and their situation, but as a parent, all this means just as much for you and more, right? You should definitely have all this stuff done. The other thing to mention, anytime you do these kinds of things, you always want to be reviewing them at least annually. And the reason why is a lot of times the rules change. New laws come in effect. That one you were talking about where, like, to get a hold of their transcripts and their records and things like that, that one's called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So, I mean, unless you have a kid in college and you've kind of read about it somewhere, the general public would never know that that even exists. But there's always laws and things coming around.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned about the differences in being a beneficiary or a joint owner on bank accounts. We certainly have done that. But the reason we did it is because we had the same thing with my dad's account. It was really good to know that one of my siblings was a joint owner, so that when it came to his passing, just because someone passes away doesn't mean the bills don't need to be paid. There's still electricity bills that need to be paid, so somebody needs to either pony up their own funds to handle the utility bills, right? Any insurance on the home, or there's just a myriad of things that need to take place. Car insurance, guess what? Dad had a car. So there are things that you really don't think about these things. There's plenty of it. But another thing that I learned recently, you mentioned having all the medical health care stuff taken care of and your power of attorney that covers maybe your health or your finances. POA dies when the individual dies. You need a will to take the place of those other things afterwards. And if you have one without the other, you don't have a full set of paperwork that you need.
That's right. I do, in my past, I've done a lot of life insurance policies for clients, and you don't really realize the mess that it puts a person in. So you're not only mourning the loss of a loved one, but then you have these other things just pop up where it requires like a court document. I mean, what are you going to do, right? Like, where do you even start with that? A lot of times it doesn't happen. I had one client that her husband owned her policy and he died. So he died without a will. It caused this huge problem with the fact that he owned her policy that was still active. She couldn't do anything about it. She just, at that point, chose to, rather than have to deal with the trying to get a court order or whatever, she just said, I'm just going to let it go. And it was really unfortunate. But yeah, so a will is really important, even if you think you don't have a lot. And you can get a will. There's a lot of places you could get a will just for free, just to at least get something together.
Right. Get it in writing, get the witnesses. You're right. There's just these kinds of legal paperwork are designed to be affordable for everyone. So don't think that you have to pay $500, $1,000 necessarily to get all your ducks in a row. Now, if you have a lot of assets, you might want to think about it. But for the simple things, you really don't need to pay a ton of money. Yeah.
I told my daughter too, she should do this one. It's called Fabric. It's an app, and you just create a will. It says you can create a will in like 5 minutes, right? It's just easy. You can name a guardian for your children, and you haven't gotten around to it. That's the thing that kind of freaks me out the most about that, is that, people that have young children, if they don't make arrangements, then it becomes this huge fight. Either everybody's fighting to have those kids, right? And sometimes people that you don't want to be raising your children. And some of them, sometimes nobody will step up for your children. And then what's left is a system, right? Because nobody will take them. Or if you have a larger family, more than maybe 2 kids, sometimes they end up getting split up because one family could only take the girls or the boys or these ages or whatever. why should your kids have to go through something that dramatic when they've already lost their parents? Assuming that, that would be always
Exactly.
the case would come to pass, right?
And
Right.
anything can happen. It's like insurance. It's like having insurance.
That's right.
You plan for the worst and you hope for the best.
That's right. And the thing is about the death thing is that everybody is going to die one day. One of my good friends passed away. She was a few days before she turned 55. She had lung cancer, terminal cancer, and I ended up closing out her estate. And she was actually pretty organized. But she didn't have much in place. She was just good at keeping files, and so I could find everything, but she really didn't have anything in place. So it's the only one that I've actually had to do myself, but I've heard so many stories where things go on years because they can't find documents or things. They don't even know, like if you have a safety deposit box, sometimes maybe they could find the key, maybe not, but even if they find the key, what bank is it for? There's just so much left to the unknown that you'll never know.
That's right. And, I was pretty lucky when my dad passed. I was the executor. And he did have all his ducks in a row. So I want people to understand it, even with having everything in place. And I do mean everything.
Yeah.
These things still take time.
Sure.
By the time it was all said and done, Dad had been gone probably 5 months by the time it was completely settled via the courts. Because even with a will, even with all of this other paperwork taken care of, it still has to go through a legal process to verify it and to make sure that everybody's got their ducks in a row and they transfer everything into the proper names, the new names. Even with all of that, it's going to be done the next day kind of thing. Now, you mentioned the bank accounts. Having that was very great. A lot of his accounts had a beneficiary. All we had to do was bring in his death certificate.
Right.
And it was handled. Right. So within a week to 2 weeks after a passing, you'll get that death certificate from the funeral home. So you can get some things taken care of quicker than others, but this is not an overnight process, even when you have it all together. So imagine how much more difficult and painful it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now that, the whole thing about the living trust too. So when you do a will, that's a more public. Anybody can find out anything. It's very public. When you have a living trust, that's a private thing versus the probate, which is a public affair. So there's pluses and minuses to both. You really just need to talk with an attorney, somebody that, has that knowledge that can let you know what you should do. Just saying, there's lots to handle, but you do need to make sure that you do take it seriously because it could be a big mess.
Yeah, start with the basics, right? Start with the things that are necessary. Your health and your property. You want to protect your health and your property. Absolutely. And you want to protect your children. So, whether you have young children or adult children, those are the three most important things that are going to have some type of an effect, either when you're in the hospital or when you pass. And for example, my mom passed when she was 42 years old. Talk about not knowing when you're going to go. Okay. I was able to get copies of her health records all the way from, and I was an adult at the time, all the way for all 4 of her pregnancies. So I knew going into my own pregnancies what the medical history was of my mom and her pregnancies. That was invaluable information for me to have. But without having all the ducks in a row, you're not going to have a clue if something should happen to your mom that early in life, right, before you even have a chance to start your family. So just knowing some of these things, knowing the health history of your family, yes, get all the legal paperwork done. Please get that done. But also have some conversations with your family, with your parents, with your grandparents. Talk about the health history of your family, because there will be some things you'll find out that you're like, I had no idea. This is information that's important for your doctors to know, but don't put it off. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can get it done within a week.
Yeah, I just say bite-sized pieces. It's like it doesn't have to be an overwhelming project, and it's almost like taxes, right? For some people, the idea of getting their taxes done, they just automatically do an extension. It's like, if you just automatically just did it, you wouldn't have to have it on your back till October,
True.
right? It's like sometimes we do these things and we don't really realize what we're doing to ourselves, because it is baggage you're carrying around with you. When you do this kind of planning, it does need to be reviewed on occasion, because things do change. Now, when you talk about, a little while ago, we said the unintended consequences of what could happen. I have personally witnessed a couple things. I had a client whose ex-spouse was still the beneficiary of the life insurance. And guess what? An ex-spouse isn't going to just give up the money to the new spouse. It doesn't happen. They're just
Not
like, too bad, so
usually.
sad. I've had one where she has dementia or Alzheimer's, I'm not sure which, but I was over looking at something through her papers. We were looking for something, and I found, by accident, but I believe that's why I was there that day, a valid long-term care policy that she had been paying for. Was worth $147,000 worth of benefit, and her grandson had been taking care of her for 5 years with no help at all. And had I not just found that one piece of paper, she would die not ever having taken advantage of this policy that she'd been paying on for years. So that can happen too, where you do have benefits, but nobody knows about them. And so when it comes time to use them, your mind isn't there to know, or you're too sick to remember, or whatever. So that's why this work is really very valuable to everybody involved. There's just lots of stories like that.
Well, Stacy, you have a free gift for our viewers and listeners. Tell us about that.
I found something very, very beneficial to everybody, and that is a digital healthcare directive. It's an advanced directive. But it's digital. So it is free, and it can be stored in the cloud for free. And the company is actually funded by medical organizations and doctor groups and things like that. So it's called My Directives. It doesn't take a long time to do it. It does ask you some kind of very introspective questions that you might be surprised about, to learn a little bit about yourself, right? Because we don't really think about this. Like, what do I really want? No one's ever really asked me that, right? So you want to do it when you have the time. You don't want to give yourself 5 minutes, but you want to think these things through, and then that will set everybody else up great if something did happen to you. So text the word student to this number. So you have to write this down, but it's 714-709-2027. So 714-709-2027. Just text the word student, and then you will get a text back with the registration link to take you to the My Directives page. And then you can and it'll let you save it when you're in the middle of it and come back to it later and all that. But it lets you pick a agent. Now, this is the other thing. You have to be so careful who you pick as your agent. You want to make sure that they understand that they'll follow what your wishes are. Sometimes your spouse is not the best agent, believe it or not, right? Because they're a little too close. Like, they don't want to let you go. You might be sort of like, there's no chance, no brain activity, no this, no that. And they're like, no, don't unplug. Don't. Yeah, that's the very first thing that I would suggest that everybody do. Get that healthcare directive. Now, when you pick your agent, they have to accept. So you don't do this in a bubble where you say, hey, I'm picking them, and they're not going to know about it. You don't want to surprise that. That would not be a good surprise, So they do get an email that says, you've been chosen. Do you accept? And then they'll get a copy of it. But then you have to do the final thing. You have to get it either notarized or witnessed, depending on your state. So don't let that part go undone, because at least now they would know what you wanted, but it wouldn't be necessarily legally binding, and they might not abide by it or whatever. And then this is the other really good thing about this My Directives thing. They have this vault, right? They'll let you upload other important documents. So you can have your will uploaded and saved there. You can have your trust. You can have anything important uploaded and saved there in this vault. And it could really save the day, because I found out from a probate attorney, it happens more often than you know, where somebody will go and destroy a will because they don't like what's in it. After the person's died, they'll change things in it because they don't like how it's written, or they will totally forge a thing altogether.
It just makes sense to go ahead and get your ducks in a row, get everything done, and think about all those different things. I know when I was starting to put together my list of things, right, that I needed to take care of, you might forget, like you said, that particular life insurance policy or something to that nature. And it was weeks afterwards, as I'm putting this together, that I realized, I forgot about that thing, right? So it's good to start somewhere. And this is a great place to start. Thank you so much for thinking about that. That's fantastic. So that's going to be in our show notes for everyone to be able to click on that link or to text student to 714-709-2027 and get that started. So Stacy, how else can people find you? Tell us about that.
So I have a website, gotittogethernow.com, gotittogethernow.com. Also have this podcast called Legacy Therapy. So legacy therapy, planning techniques to leave a stress-free legacy. And there's an online course called Got It Together, where all of this stuff will be in little bite-sized pieces so that you can actually have it done. And I know that's what it takes for many people. So it'll get done, and then everything that you have will be organized in one place, up to date, having had the conversations around it. And then if something, God forbid, does happen, that person that you've entrusted knows right where to go and what to do and who to contact and all of that jazz. And it does take a little thinking. Like you said, you can't even off the top of your head, and it's all about you, remember it all. So until you have it written down, there's so many things. Like one really important thing is who's going to take care of your pets. You need to think about this.
Another thing that I realized as I was starting to write these things down, what about your accounts, credit card accounts, your online accounts that have your credit cards listed in them, right? Let's not forget, take them off the voter registration rolls. There's a lot of details that you have to cover when somebody passes, right. But getting these things together for your family will be very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, Stacy, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope and pray that everyone who watches or listens takes action. Get it started right now. Go to the website, text the student to this phone number. It's all going to be in the show notes. Make sure that you do something. This is a start. And then talk more with Stacy about what else is necessary. Get involved in her course so that you will actually get it done now.
Thanks, Denise. Appreciate it.